Do note that the incorrect examples are exaggerated on purpose so that the issues are easier to see. In my opinion, the correct examples do properly show what they are meant to show. However, they are in no way perfect. As an exercise, see if you can spot issues with my form in the correct examples. If you do, please leave a comment down below. In this episode, we'll take a look at how to train power generation and trajectory. Just like transitions, these two skills are essential when it comes to cutting. We have already been training these two through the first half of the series. Now we take a closer look at them and see how we can train and diagnose these two specifically. What these two have in common is that they greatly benefit from having access to good cutting media. Once again, you do not need to use any cutting media to diagnose your cutting, and you can definitely become a great cutter without ever using any. However, for power generation and trajectory, there is greater than usual benefit for using some. In this case, tatami and clay. As usual, tatami is great for this, but it can get very expensive very fast. For both of these, you need either a wide or a thick target, and with tatami, that is how you get expensive. With clay, this is really not the case, especially as you can basically reuse clay indefinitely if you store it properly. Naturally, you can still use other cutting media for this, but especially clay is exceptionally good for this. But now, let's get to the actual subject of this episode. At its core, power generation simply means how fast can you make the sword move. At this point you should already know that the faster the sword moves, the better. Because of this, power generation is extremely important. As usual, with cutting it is not as simple as it sounds. I split power generation into three separate parts. Explosive acceleration, maintaining, and rapid deceleration. These three combined form your ability to control the speed of your sword. You can hear all of these in the sword wind, and indeed you have already been training these when you have been practicing the cuts in the earlier episodes. With power generation, it is possible to sacrifice some form to gain some power generation. You should not do this when training, but it can be useful in some specific situations, such as in a competition so that you can get the sword through the target in the first place. Do you understand that if you sacrifice too much form, you are going to fail the cut anyways? Let's take a look at three of these separately and how to do targeted training for them. I will also explain how to diagnose these using cutting media. Let's start with explosive acceleration. This has basically two parts. How fast can you make the sword move, and how quickly can you get it to that speed? This is very easy to hear in the sword wind. The earlier the sound starts, the faster you are able to accelerate the sword. The louder the sound is and the higher the pitch is, the faster you are able to make the sword move. Thus, aim to make the sword wind to start as soon as possible and aim to make the sound as high-pitched and as loud as possible. Indeed, if you have been following the exercises, you have already been doing this. Do remember, you can directly compare the sword wind two different swords make. When it comes to training, there are multiple things you can do. In my opinion, the first one is effective technique. The better you are at basic cutting technique, the less strength you are going to need. You should be able to achieve perfectly competent levels at this by simply doing basic cutting drills using the sword you usually use to train. This doesn't mean that there are no ways to target training to explosive acceleration. Let's start with strength training. Even though just being strong helps, it is more beneficial if you concentrate on explosive strength. The specific movement patterns are outside the scope of this episode, so either contact a PT or look online. Now to cutting media. You can also do this as an exercise without any target. I will be using tatami as an example as that is what I have access to. As mentioned earlier, clay would also be excellent for this. You can naturally use other cutting media, but your mileage may vary. Now we get to the world of so-called shortcuts. The idea of a shortcut is that you either start the cut closer to the target, stop the cut closer to the target, or both. Do note that many people only refer to the last one when talking about shortcuts. The second example is rather often referred to as a point inline cut. In this case, we will be concentrating on the first one. The idea is that you simply have less distance to accelerate your sword. This naturally requires more explosive power generation. For example, you might need to be able to do such a shortcut after a parry or some other similar situation. A very simple exercise for this is to step by step start the cut closer to your target. As you learn to accelerate your cut in time before hitting your target, you can then start closer. I recommend that you start by cutting all the way through instead of trying to stop the point in line. This makes it easier to concentrate on this specific skill. Naturally, this can be then directly transferred to cutting medium. Even with all of these more specific exercises, still remember to listen for the sword wind. It is still your main method of training. Do your cuts explosively and listen for the sword wind. Next is maintaining, or the follow-through portion of power generation. This simply means can you maintain the speed of the cut, especially in a resistive material. It is common that people can accelerate the sword very explosively, but they don't maintain that speed. This is especially common for people who spar a lot but don't cut. They have learned to hit the target, not through it. For a more detailed explanation on this, please see the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode. When listening for the sword wind, pay attention where the sound is the loudest and has the highest pitch. If the volume and the pitch peak at the beginning of your cut but then fall, it means that you can generate speed but you don't maintain it. You should aim to maintain the peak pitch and volume through the cut, at least until your sword comes out of the imaginary target you are cutting. There are no magical exercises for this. You simply need to concentrate on accelerating the sword until it is time to stop it. As said, I think of this as trying to accelerate the sword all the time instead of just trying to maintain the speed. Just do this with every cut you train, whenever you train. It might sound simple, but generally it requires that you are confident that you can stop the sword. Otherwise, you might subconsciously start to decelerate the sword too soon. If it seems that you have issues with maintaining the speed, make sure that you can actually stop the sword first. From here, we get to the problem with training this. It is quite common that you can maintain the speed when cutting air, but not when cutting resistive material. This is, well, because an actual target resists the sword trying to go through it. Again, there are no magic exercises for this. Simply concentrate on trying to accelerate your sword throughout the whole cut. Pels and other hard targets can be a very useful tool for training this. They give you an actual target to hit. You want to cut the target and try to accelerate the sword through it. Naturally, as the sword should not go through the target, what you actually need to do is keep applying pressure after the hit. Your sword should not ricochet off the target. Also, make sure that you maintain proper edge alignment and trajectory after the hit. These exercises can help you to learn to cut through your target. From here we get to cutting media. Clay and tatami are clearly the best ones for this. Other cutting media are not really suitable as you need a rather thick and dense target. Something like rolled newspaper might still work though. There are basically two different types of targets you might want to consider for this. Wide ones and thick ones. These two test slightly different kinds of power generation. Let's start with a thick target. These can be either multiple tatamis rolled in a one big roll, or a big clump of clay which is roughly as wide as it is deep. A thick target requires a higher peak power generation when compared to a wide and shallow target. Generally speaking though, the target is not that wide, so you only need to maintain this peak power generation for a relatively short time. This also means that you need to be able to maintain edge alignment and trajectory for only a relatively short time. With a thick target, maintaining speed, trajectory and edge alignment is generally more difficult than with a wide and shallow target. As such, a very thick target is mainly a test of your peak power generation, but it still has a clear aspect of being able to maintain that peak power generation as the target is very resistive. With a wide target, you need to be able to maintain that speed, trajectory and edge alignment for a considerably longer time, but your peak power generation doesn't have to be that high. This is a good test for being able to maintain your power over a larger portion of your cutting arc. You can also test the beginning and the end of your arc separately. However, this has the negative that you don't actually have to maintain the power generation through the whole arc. You must only be able to generate it at the beginning or at the end of the arc. When done properly though, this can make testing this a lot cheaper. To test the start of your arc, stand to the side of the target you are cutting to. To test the end of the arc, stand to the side you are starting the cut from. With these exercises, you should be able to learn how to maintain your power generation. Remember though that you should first learn to do this when cutting air. If you can't do this when cutting air, you will not be able to do it when cutting media. The last part is the rapid deceleration of your cut. This simply means that you are able to bring your sword to a stop within a short distance. This allows you to make an effective cut and still bring your sword to a stop if need be. Such as leaving the point in line to threaten your opponent in case you happen to miss with your cut. Or doing a feint and then a second intention attack. As explained in the structure and the how to hold a longsword episodes, if you try to incorrectly stop your sword with the point in line, such as with a push-pull cut, there is the risk of injuring your wrists and elbows. Because of this, start learning to stop the cut with the point in line with low-powered cuts. Only after you can do it safely with these slower cuts, then start to add more speed. The first and the most important thing is that your elbows and wrists must be properly locked. For a more detailed explanation, please refer to the previous mentioned episodes. Their links are in the description. This means that you must have reached full extension before trying to stop the cut. If you try to stop the cut during extension, it is rather likely that your upper arm stops, but your forearm and your sword continue moving. After this, there are two possibilities. Either you use your biceps to stop the cut, which can cause an injury, or you are not able to stop the extension in time, thus overextending your elbow, which can cause a serious injury. Also, don't have your wrists and elbows at the limit of their range of motion. There must be some space to rotate as a buffer. Make sure that the wrist of your dominant hand is on the webbing between the thumb and index finger of your non-dominant hand. This allows your hands to stabilize your wrists, making sure that the pommel doesn't pop up, thus causing excess ulnar deviation of your wrist. Now, how to actually stop a cut midway? Let's start with the horizontal cut, as it is the easiest. You simply need to lock up your core. If your elbows and wrists are properly locked and you have proper grounding, the horizontal movement will stop. Your core is easily strong enough to very rapidly stop the movement, if you have good posture. If you do not have a neutral spine or pelvis, or you are leaning, this might be very difficult, so pay attention to your posture. Then the difficult part, vertical movement. Let's start with ascending vertical movement, as it is the easier one. To stop ascending vertical movement, simply use your lats to stop your arms. Your lats are strong enough to stop the vertical movement of your arms, especially as there is gravity helping you. To stop the point in line, simply contract your lats mid-cut. Also contract your shoulders and your upper back so you don't start to move your arms down. This also stabilizes your shoulder, preventing rotation. Now to the interesting one, descending cuts. I split this to two parts, the upper part and the lower part. Where the exact line between these two goes depends greatly on your build, so you just have to try it for yourself. Let's start with the upper part, as it is the simpler one. The upper part consists from the beginning cut all the way up to where the technique for the lower part starts to work. For the upper part, you simply have to use your shoulders and upper back muscles to stop the cut. This is the most difficult way to stop a cut, especially if you are very good at explosive power generation. If you are very good at explosive power generation, it is completely possible that you are not able to stop the sword in the upper part with full powered cuts. In this case, if you plan to stop the cut, you simply need to use less power. However, this is usually not an issue, as the lower part generally covers all the important cases for a cut like this. Now to the lower part. This usually starts when your arms are at shoulder level. We are going to use the same theory of using our structure as when we stop a normal descending cut. You simply need to pull your shoulders back and turn your elbows in so that your upper arms can come in contact with your chest. With this, you can very rapidly stop even a powerful descending cut. Simply do this just before you need to stop your cut. Pulling your shoulders back will also activate your upper back muscles, stabilizing your shoulders and preventing rotation. If you have your shoulders pushed forwards, turning your elbows in will not be enough to bring your upper arm in contact with your chest. Thus, you will fail in stopping the cut with the point in line. Once again, remember that you must have your arms at full extension before stopping the cut, but not at the limit of their range of motion. Otherwise, there is a risk of injury. Start with slow cuts, and as you learn to stop those cuts, add more power. When cutting air, it is once again very important that you listen for the sword wind. When you are stopping the cut midway, as explained previously, it is important that the sword wind is audible until just before you stop your cut. If the sword wind stops considerably before the sword stops, it means it takes you too much time to decelerate the sword and the cut is no longer effective at the later part of the arc. To train this, use the previously explained techniques to stop cuts midway. You should do this with every cut you learn. I recommend that you start with horizontal and ascending cuts as those are the easiest ones. Then move to descending cuts and start with the lower part as that is the easier one. Remember to listen for the sword wind. Make sure that it stops only a moment before the sword stops. Have full extension before stopping the cut. Have your elbows and wrists lock out and make sure that there is range of motion left. Start with slow cuts and then add more speed later. Cutting media is excellent for this as it makes sure that the cut is good just before it stops. You should make the cut so that the sword stops as close to the target as possible. You can also combine the short start and the short end to a single cut. Naturally, this is more difficult and you should learn the explosive acceleration and the pointing line cut first. Only after you can do those two consistently, try this exercise, which is often called shortcut. This allows you to do effective cuts in a very limited space. It is very difficult, but it allows you a wider range of options when fencing, as you no longer need to do full cuts. The trajectory is the path your sword travels when cutting, and that path should be completely straight. For a more detailed explanation, please refer to the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode. The link is in the description. In this episode, we concentrate specifically on keeping the trajectory completely straight for as long as possible, and more specifically when cutting through resistive material. It is quite common that you are able to keep the trajectory straight when cutting air, but run into problems when cutting through resistive material. As said in the intro, clay is excellent for this. So is tatami, but it can get very expensive very fast. For this you can also use water bottles and similar targets if you are able to have them so that they are in a straight line. However, once again they are not as good as clay or tatami as they are not as resistive. When cutting air, the best ways to see that your trajectory is straight is to have a training partner watch you, cut in front of a reflective surface such as a mirror, or video your cutting. Especially small issues with the trajectory can be difficult or even impossible to hear in the sword wind. Before you try these more advanced diagnostics techniques with cutting media, you should have a good straight trajectory when cutting air. When cutting media, there are two things to consider. How long does the cutting portion of the arc need to be, and how dense is the target? With a wider target, you need to be able to maintain straight trajectory for a longer portion of the arc. With a denser or usually just thicker target, it is more difficult to maintain straight trajectory. In other words, the more resistive the target is, the harder it is to maintain good trajectory. And naturally, the longer you have to maintain good trajectory, the harder it is. I mentioned in the power generation section that you can sacrifice some form to gain some power generation. A scooping trajectory is a very common result of this. Because of this, sacrificing form to gain power generation can be an option with a narrower target, but not really with a wider target. Naturally, you should never sacrifice form if any way possible. As said, clay is very good for this as you can freely change its thickness and width as long as your stand can support it. To use tatami as a target for a long arc, you either need to have multiple stands or a specialty stand which can have multiple tatami at once. To have a dense target with tatami, simply roll multiple mats into a one target. This gets very expensive very fast. When doing long trajectory diagnostics on tatami, actually remember to check the trajectory. Sadly, there are no specific exercises for this. Simply learn to do full-length cuts as explained earlier in the series. To prevent changes in trajectory, follow the principles laid out in the structure and how to hold a longsword episodes. Most often, changes in trajectory are caused by weak structure. Usually it is either a bent arm or a weak grip. Once again, for a thorough explanation, please refer to the previous mentioned episodes. Before we get to the recap, go and tap the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Clay is excellent for testing your power generation and trajectory. So is tatami, but it can be very expensive. There are three parts to power generation: explosive acceleration, maintaining, and rapid deceleration. Pels are excellent for training maintaining. Think of cutting through the target, not hitting the target. When training rapid deceleration, make sure that your elbows and wrists are locked out and not at the end of their range of motion. Start with slow cuts and make sure that you are able to safely stop them before moving to more powerful cuts. Having a straight trajectory through the whole cutting arc is very important. It is common to have a good trajectory when cutting air, but not when cutting resistive material. This is usually caused by lacking structure.